Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani and welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism, narcissists, and all things in toxic human relationships. Increasingly, these videos come from your suggestions, your ideas. I get so many of them. Sometimes 100 people ask for the same one, and then I put my head down and really do the due diligence. I look into the theoretical work, the research work, to put together a video that I hope answers your questions. And as always, if you want me to build upon it or say anything more, always drop that in the comments. This is an evolving channel, hopefully in response to what you need. And as always, before we get going, I'm going to tell you what we're going to talk about today. First, what we're going to talk about is, can you catch narcissism from a narcissist, like catching a cold or some other kind of virus? Can you catch it? Is it infectious? Before we go there, please consider subscribing to this channel. It's a great community, as you'll see, I should say, in the comments. And then if you end up liking this video, only if you do, give me that like. So let's talk about this issue. Is narcissism infectious? Can you actually catch it? Because if you can, you might be thinking, whoa, we're in trouble, because this seems to be getting more common all the time. Okay? So let's start with a sort of philosophical comment. The philosopher Nietzsche wrote, this is a great quote too, he wrote, "Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you." So, spend enough time with the narcissist, you are gazing into an abyss. So this leads into a question I get very often. Basically, just as Nietzsche just suggested, the question becomes, will I become toxic if I spend enough time with a toxic person? This is a complicated issue. So let me break it down. Let's start simple. First of all, narcissism is not an infectious disease per se. It's a personality pattern, and it's a personality pattern that unfolds as part of one's social development, early life history, and their own personal temperament. So no, you can't catch it. You develop it. But here's the tricky bit, the real challenge. If you spend enough time with a narcissist, yeah, it does change you. And some of these changes may end up being things you don't like about yourself. So let's start easy. Let's start in adult life, okay? Let's say your partner or your spouse is a narcissist, because by the time you enter into an adult relationship, you are an adult and your personality is fully grown by then, okay? So it's not going to change that much. Now, let's revisit what happens to you when you're in a narcissistic relationship. In that relationship, you're subjected to all kinds of awful things: lack of empathy, entitlement, arrogance, their chronic sense of being a victim, their hypersensitivity, their chronic need for validation, for admiration. And what does that mean for you? That means years of invalidation, dismissiveness, gaslighting, minimization, walking on eggshells, confusion, and self-doubt. Now, enduring a narcissistic relationship really becomes about survival. Over time, these relationships leave you feeling helpless, hopeless, and powerless, on top of all that other stuff, like the invalidation and all that other stuff I listed. So, to stay in this relationship, a lot of people learn to start clipping their own wings. In essence, you sort of start giving up on yourself, on life, on the relationship. Now, I want you to think for a minute about what survival looks like. Survival is life stripped to the bare minimum. If I were trying to survive on a desert island, I would not be concerned with good manners or being a good empathic listener. I got to be honest with you, I'd be focused on getting my next meal, on finding shelter, on getting water, on staying alive. In a narcissistic relationship, survivalism means that you may find that you stop getting the chance or even care to practice your basic skills like empathy, compassion, kindness, reciprocity, and mutuality. You become so used to getting interrupted, to being ignored, so you may speak very abruptly to make your point, or you might give very short, clipped answers. You may no longer show your feelings as much because why would you? They were constantly not noticed. Your feelings were mocked. Your feelings were minimized. Why would you put yourself in that vulnerability? You stop doing the stuff of being a kind, compassionate person because sadly, it doesn't serve a function in what is often this primary relationship. These things, empathy, compassion, sharing, these things are devalued. They're not rewarded. They're not received or well received, and they're not seen. There's also a darker side to this, and it is something I have observed in people who have stayed in narcissistic relationships for 10 years or longer. These are what I term the long-term survivors of narcissistic relationships. People in these long-term relationships, when we'd expect this in any relationship, you start to mirror your partner, especially if the relationship becomes quite isolated, as narcissistic relationships often do. You, as a once healthy person in this relationship, may slowly find yourself lacking empathy at the level you once did, but you also may find yourself seeking out validation. It makes sense why somebody would do this. You aren't getting any at home with the narcissist. You may even find yourself behaving in an entitled manner, maybe even talking over other people. It's as though your healthy interpersonal muscles start to atrophy as you spend more and more time in a narcissistic relationship. You know, it's interesting. I remember one case in particular. It was years ago. It was a personal acquaintance I had known through other people. And this person was very clearly married to a horrific, malignant narcissist. I think the marriage was like 15 years. In the years I knew her through these other people, I watched this woman morph from a relatively mindful, kind, aware, compassionate person who became increasingly abrupt, clipped, self-referential. She talked about herself a lot, was very entitled. It was a really fascinating but really quite sad evolution to watch. But it actually made sense to me, given what horrible treatment she was living through on a daily basis. Interestingly, she did end up getting divorced, and the divorce was messy and expensive and painful. And as she no longer lived with this man, the more time she spent away from him, she slowly began to pop back to becoming a little bit more self-aware, a little more aware of other people, less entitled. It was as though those interpersonal skills she once had no more function in that relationship, so she kind of lost them. The only example I could think of here is if you move to another country and you stop speaking your usual language in favor of the new language, you may start losing a little bit of your other language if you don't practice it. We lose things like language and other skills. The same thing happens with some of these interpersonal skills as well. There's also another element to narcissistic relationships, of course, and that's the fallout of narcissistic abuse. Now, one pattern that can be observed in survivors of narcissistic abuse is that they can become socially withdrawn, emotionally distracted, isolated, and their emotions may become more constricted, secondary to the confusion and anxiety generated by being in a toxic relationship. They may then look like they have less empathy to other people. But this idea of catching narcissism really comes down to how you still feel. If you really, let's just play this out, if you really did catch narcissism, then let's face it, you would lack empathy, you would truly be entitled, you'd be arrogant, you'd be superficial, you'd be that person always looking for validation, and you'd fall apart and crumble whenever you were stressed, particularly if you were disappointed, and you'd lash out with rage. That's not likely to happen. You may not manifest compassion in the same way, but you still got it. So let's go back to that idea of survival. What we see, what does happen, is that in being in a relationship with or working for narcissistic people, nobody has your back. In fact, they may not just be neglecting you. They may be actively harming and manipulating you. So in a way, a sort of selfishness, a survival selfishness may engulf you. You need to do you, or nothing's going to happen in your life. You'll get stuck or worse. You may find that you are having to put your needs first at times, and perhaps you actually are putting your needs first in a very appropriate manner. But you're so unaccustomed to putting your needs first, you label them as selfish. But this act of having to sometimes grab those little scraps of what you need to take care of you, and then also feeling like you don't have the bandwidth to listen to other people's problems, can really factor into that fear that people have. Like, am I becoming narcissistic too? Nah, I don't think you are. You're probably just getting burned out from never getting repleted, from never getting filled up again in your primary relationships. But I'm going to go back to this bigger question. Can I catch narcissism? Because I came from a narcissistic family. Many of the things I just said about survivalism, the things I said, like, for example, believing that doing what you need for yourself is selfish rather than being human to take care of yourself, and that idea of diminished bandwidth, these are all factors that come to play if you originate from a narcissistic family system. Since narcissistic family systems mean that the family narcissists, the parents, maybe the sibling, get everything, they get all the resources, while everyone else is basically starving to death, you can see how this survivalism could have kicked in as a child and could carry in maybe into a selfishness you sometimes feel as an adult. But there are bigger issues with families. Yes, absolutely. People who come from narcissistic family systems are at risk of developing narcissistic patterns in adulthood. Now, given that narcissism is very much an attachment issue, narcissistic parents aren't very strong in the attachment department. The lack of mirroring you get from a narcissistic parent, the fact that no one taught you to regulate your emotions, and just simply mirroring entitled parents, all of that is going to put a person at risk for narcissism. But here's the rub. If you're an adult, you survived your narcissistic family system. If you got through that and you still have intact empathy, you're not entitled, you don't believe you deserve special treatment, you can be self-reflective regarding your impact on others, you can regulate your emotions, you don't require validation to get through the day, every single day, you can manage disappointment, then you're good. Then you're good. You aren't going to become that monster that Nietzsche was talking about just because you're spending time with narcissists. But again, all of that said, spending time with narcissists is in fact taking a tremendous toll on you. It's toxic. And it makes it much more difficult if you spend time with these kinds of people to be your best self. Being with a narcissist, having to go gray rock, having to fluff them to just keep your life and running on time, all of that means that in order to stay in a relationship with any narcissist, parent, partner, friend, you may find yourself pawning off pieces of your authentic self. And you need to do that in order to survive, because they will berate and devalue your true self, or they'll gaslight it. It's not good for you. Of course you hide your true self from them. You're being self-protective. The transformations that happen to a person experiencing narcissistic abuse can be scary. And you may wonder if you are actually turning narcissistic. And because the narcissist in your life may actually accuse you of being a narcissist, and that's back to their standby tricks, their projection, their gaslighting, you run the risk of beginning to believe them. Narcissistic abuse pulls us away from our true selves. I want you to take the time to become acquainted and reacquainted with yourself. Only you know if you're empathic, self-aware, kind, compassionate, and well-regulated. No, you don't become narcissistic by dint of spending time with a narcissist. However, you are also not going to be your best self. You're not going to be your authentic self. And losing those parts of yourself is never good. And on top of that, in your narcissistic relationship, you may sadly have learned to be a gaslighter. Here's the issue. The problem is the person you're gaslighting is yourself. Please stop doing that. We've got enough problems in our world these days with infectious diseases. I think we're all clear on that. Narcissism may be harming your mental health, but thank goodness it's not infectious. What it does to us is it hijacks us when we're in the presence of it. And that sort of hollow, almost post-traumatic, empty sense you feel from being with a narcissist, not feeling in touch with your feelings, isolating, almost not caring as much about other people, that can leave some people to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm becoming this person. You're not. Here's the experiment, and this is the challenge I'm going to issue to all of you, okay? Here's what I want you to do. I want you, if you're able to find a 1, 2, 3, even 4-day period away from your narcissist, okay? I want you to do that. And I want you to almost keep a journal and track yourself and see how much you start popping back to your usual stuff. You laugh louder, you feel more comfortable in your skin, you just feel warmer, kinder, more compassionate. If that happens over time, you're not a narcissist. That's all inside of you. You've learned to lock it up, lock it away from the narcissist, who ends up often harming and criticizing those best parts of yourself. So give yourself a narcissism diet from time to time. Try and get those breaks, because when you do, you're going to start seeing that beautiful, authentic part of yourself. And good golly, I'd love to see that that's the part of you that gets to shine on a daily basis. So remember, you can't catch narcissism, but it ain't good for you if you're spending time with it. I hope that answers that question for those of you who asked it. Thanks again, as always, for tuning in. If you like this video, Dr. Ramani needs some love too. Send me some of that validation. Give me that thumbs up. Please subscribe to this channel. And as always, stay healthy. Bye-bye now.